I was a delivery driver for Pizza Hut during college. A bunch of my buddies from school also worked there, so it was laid back and sometimes even fun. It would get really busy with deliveries up until 7 to 8 o'clock, then it would have a sudden drop-off in orders. Our place accepted delivery orders until 11, then would only accept pickup orders until 12. It was a Saturday night, so it was busier than most other days, but after 9:30, there were no more orders. We had someone pick up an order around 10:15, but we had nothing else until 10:50 when the phone started ringing.
Hello, this is Pizza Hut.
I waited for a second. I could hear light breathing on the other side, but they weren't responding.
Hello?
Finally, a woman started speaking. She was talking quietly and had a shaky voice. She asked for a small pepperoni pizza to be delivered to her address. I said okay, and just before I hung up, something in me made me ask if she was okay. There was just something off about the way she was talking. She said she was just fine and hung up. I sent the order through, and 15 minutes later I got on the road. The house was a couple blocks away, and there were no other cars out, so I got there in just a few minutes. As I drove up their driveway and parked, I saw a heavy light coming from around the garage where the front door was. I got the pizza and the receipt ready, and as I looked back, I saw the light constantly going in and out, like someone was walking in front of it. I rounded the garage and realized the light was coming from inside the house, shining out the open front door. I stepped onto the porch, and before I even reached the door, I heard footsteps rushing down some stairs inside. Then a man came to the doorway. He was a tall, heavy-set, bald man, but what was really weird was that he was completely out of breath. He was taking big, exhausted breaths and had sweat dripping from his head. Sure, he could have just been working out, but the expression on his face just made it all the more unnerving. He looked angry and frustrated, like he didn't want me to be there. I don't think I've ever seen someone that unhappy that their pizza arrived. I asked him if the order was correct, since he obviously wasn't the one who placed it, which then made me think back to the woman on the phone. Putting everything together made for an uncomfortable possible scenario in my head. I said the total and handed the man the receipt.
Hold on, I need my wallet,
he said, walking down the hall toward what I assume was the kitchen. As I waited for a moment, I heard a quiet sound coming from inside the house upstairs. It was a dull thump, like someone was hitting the wall. I heard it again, louder this time, and seconds later, the man came rushing down the hallway, grabbing the box from my hands and throwing cash at me, then slammed the door in my face. I stood there in shock for a second, hearing the man's footsteps rushing upstairs. I couldn't hear much else, so I walked back to my car while processing everything. Once I got out of their driveway, I drove a minute down the road, then pulled over. I decided it best to call the police and just give them all the information I had and ask them to just do a checkup to make sure it was all okay. When I got back to Pizza Hut, I told my friends about the unusual situation. They thought it was odd too, but none of them seemed worried about it. The rest of my shift went by fast, and I got home at 12:15. Not long after, I got a call. It was an officer that did a wellness check on the woman that I said was at the house. Only, he said there was no woman at all. He described the man, but he was allowed inside the home and never saw anyone else. The man said he lived alone and had no idea what woman I was talking about. I know what I heard though. Someone else was in that house, and it was definitely a woman that called to place the order. The fact that the man was lying about things that I was 100% sure about made me really uneasy. The cop told me that there wasn't much else to be done unless something else came up. It's been a long time since this all happened, but I still think back to it. I could be blowing it all out of proportion, but there's a big part of me that doesn't think so. My name is Tommy, and I started doing Uber Eats last year after I lost my part-time retail job. I'd seen their ads everywhere about how the job was so relaxing and easy money, and some of my friends were curious about the gig too. So I took one for the team to figure out if all the hype was true. It wasn't. Driving around on a time crunch made the gig really stressful, and sometimes it would be for just a couple bucks. I was only a teenager, and my only bills I had to pay were my car payment and car insurance, so making a ton of money wasn't necessary, but I did feel like I was getting ripped off for the amount of time and work it was. I pushed aside getting a different job because I was lazy, but after this happened, I quit right away. I picked up an order from a Chinese place and was heading to the customer's address. I don't remember it being a large order or anything. I think it was just normal small order with a small payout. On the way to their address, I got a text in the Uber Eats app. It was my customer asking where I was. Then another text came in, telling me to hurry up. I was driving, so I couldn't respond, but I was just confused and honestly a little annoyed. I'd just picked up the order a couple minutes prior, so it wasn't like I was running late or anything. I shrugged it off and thought it was just a mistake on their part. The address wasn't far, only about 10 minutes. It was in the less well-off neighborhood in my town, though, with pretty old and small houses. It's actually funny, though, because the customers in smaller, cheaper houses usually tipped more than the rich people. Anyway, I pulled up next to their driveway and got out of my car, holding their bag of food. What caught my attention as I walked up their driveway was that the house had all of its lights off. It wasn't the most scary thing in the world, but it was something I took note of. When I got up to the front door, I knocked quickly and took my phone out to take the picture of it on the porch. But just as I snapped the photo, "Hey!" a man yelled from my left, standing by the corner of the house. I jumped, then awkwardly said hi. He started walking toward me, taking a key out of his pocket. "I don't know what took you so fucking long." He walked right in front of me and held the single key up and unlocked the front door. His attitude had me in disbelief. I didn't know what to do or say, so I just stood there like an idiot. "Come here. I need your help since you took your time driving. It'll be quick." He waited by the door, holding it open. No, I'm okay. I should really get back to work." The man looked angry and took a step toward me, reaching out like he was trying to grab me. I jolted my shoulder back to avoid his hand, then backed up and walked away from the porch. Then just as I got to the driveway, bright headlights flashed over me. The man by the door ran outside and around the house, leaving the front door open as the car pulled up the driveway. It turned out to be the homeowners, returning from dinner. The man I met at the door didn't live there, and the homeowners had no idea who he was or how he had gotten a key to their house. We called the police and explained the situation to them. Knowing everything now, though, it made more sense why the man wanted me to rush to the house. He probably knew that the homeowners could be back at any minute, and he wanted to have enough time to do whatever it was he was going to do to me before they got back. I still don't have any answers for what happened that night, or what was going to happen, and I don't think I ever will, but I have stopped doing deliveries. I drive for Postmates 3 to 4 days a week, depending on my other work schedule. Delivery driving is my relaxing side job that I do to help pay for extra things I want, like vacations or clothes, while my other job pays for my more necessary bills, like rent. So I never take delivery driving too seriously. I just go about it, and if I don't end up making a lot of money one night, it's no big deal. On this day, I started right when I got out of work, around 8. By 10, I have actually made a decent amount of cash, more than most nights. Although I'd usually stop around this time, why call it quits when I was doing well? I decided to keep going until I either got too tired or the orders stopped coming in. I accepted the next order and continued to the restaurant. It was a medium-sized order from Wendy's with a regular tip, nothing uncommon. I drove through and picked it up, then clicked start route on my phone to give me directions to the customer's house. Except it wasn't to a house. It was a GPS location set near a grocery store 15 minutes away. I'd had plenty of deliveries ordered to grocery stores or other places of work from the employees, but it was only odd because they didn't put the store as the address. They used an exact location instead. Anyway, I started the drive up there. When I got to the parking lot by the grocery store, I noticed it was empty. I pulled right up to the front and parked, then got out with the food. I took a look around, but was pretty sure the store was closed. I texted the customer, letting them know I was at the store. They replied right away, saying they were around the building in the back, and that I should see them right around to the corner. I was definitely skeptical, but I got back in my car and drove around the store. There didn't seem to be anything there, just a couple parked cars in the far back by one of the other stores. I stopped and looked, but still didn't see anyone. This was when I started to get really uneasy feeling. I was thinking this may not be worth it, and put the car back in drive, but then my phone started buzzing.
Hey, we're coming up right now. Be there in just a minute.
A man said, hanging up right after. I looked around again, feeling even more uncomfortable. Something just wasn't sitting right with me. I made a short U-turn and started to go back the way I came, until someone ran in front of my car, holding their hands out in a stop motion. I braked, and they came up to my window.
Hey, you got my order?
I grabbed the bag and rolled down the window, handing it to him, but he didn't take it. I felt dumb, holding the bag out while he just looked at me. Then I heard a quiet footstep from the other side of the car before the back door suddenly swung open. I dropped the bag outside the window and floored it as the guy by my window yelled at me to stop. I guess whoever was at the back door had jumped into my car as I pulled away. He reached forward, trying to shift my car into park, but after failing a few times, he jumped out of the moving car onto the pavement. I saw him get up and both of them running away as I turned the corner and got out of there. The police were of no help, saying they would do what they could, but never giving me any updates. I was stupid to have fallen for their trap, but I don't think I was the only one. Doing some research, just 2 weeks before my incident, a delivery driver went missing during an active delivery in a nearby town. There were no leads on what happened, as the driver's car was never found either. I think this might have been those same two men doing something terrible that I can't even begin to imagine. Back in high school, I signed up for DoorDash just to see if it was as good as they advertised it. Initially, though, it took me a whole month to finally get myself to take on my first delivery. But from then on, I did a couple deliveries a day and was really happy with the results. A couple months after that, I quit my grocery job and started dashing every day after school and even on most weekends. On this night, I was working extra late because it was a holiday weekend. I was driving from 8 p.m. until 2 a.m., pretty much just going back and forth from the 24/7 McDonald's. A little past 2, I picked up another McDonald's order and went en route to the customer. It was set to be delivered at some sort of a warehouse, and in the notes, it said to go in through the side doors and drop it off at the front desk. When I got there, I pulled into this huge parking lot. It was mostly empty, only having a few semi-trucks in it. The building was definitely an old warehouse though, being just a large rectangle with a few windows and a single door at the front. I checked one more time to make sure I had it right to deliver it through the side door. then pulled around to the side and parked. The side door was one of those really heavy metal doors with a small glass window. I looked through that tiny window and didn't see anything but a small and dark entrance room, but the glare from my car's headlights made the window reflective and hard to see through. I swung it open and was immediately taken back. It was just as dark as it seemed through the window, and it only had a tiny wall light in the corner that was more of a dim safety light. There was no front desk, so I walked around the corner and stood at the end of a long, unlit corridor. I knew that most places that have night shift workers don't keep on the unnecessary lights, but this seemed excessive. I couldn't even see the end of the hallway, so if I were to walk down there, I would be walking into complete darkness. I took my phone out and checked, now for a third time, to see if I'd gone to the wrong place or through the wrong door. Everything seemed right, but there wasn't any way I was going to walk through that hallway, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized how quiet the whole building was. No machinery moving or people talking, not a sound at all. I decided to call the customer. I clicked on their name and had to dial the number, and just a moment later, I heard a phone ring echo from the other end of the hallway. After another few seconds, it rang again, but it was closer and louder this time. I stared into this empty corridor and could barely make out the faint glow of someone's phone. "Hey, I got an order here from DoorDash. I'm gonna leave it right here for you," I said, setting the bag down in front of me. The figure of a large man started to come out of the dark corridor, but they didn't say anything. I waited another second, but as they got closer, it just really seemed unnerving the way they were walking so fast and not speaking. I had this feeling like someone was going to jump out behind me or something, and overall was a little freaked out. I turned around and walked quickly out of the door and back to my car. A few moments later, I saw some movement from behind the small glass window on the door, just before I pulled away. That whole thing, it gave me chills and had me call it a night and go straight home. In the end, I chose to believe there was just a weird situation all around, but nothing really happened, so I blew it off. A couple days would go by, and on Monday evening, while I was driving again, I got a strange call. It was from the police department. What happened next was more complicated than it had to be, but basically they questioned me about why I was at that specific warehouse at 2:30 a.m. on Saturday morning. Apparently they had security footage of my car pulling up. After explaining I was just a DoorDash driver, and I proved it with the delivery receipt, they told me what was going on. They said that the workers came back from their holiday weekend, where the warehouse was not in operation, and found a DoorDash delivery sitting in the middle of the hallway. Whoever was there had broken in and ordered with a fake account, which is all scary in its own right. But the creepiest part is that they didn't even take the bag of food. It's pretty obvious that they were looking for something else. I don't know what they wanted from me, but I can only assume that if I had stayed and waited for the man, something terrible would have happened. Back in high school, I signed up for DoorDash just to see if it was as good as they advertised it. Initially, though, it took me a whole month to finally get myself to take on my first delivery, but from then on, I did a couple deliveries a day and was really happy with the results. A couple months after that, I quit my grocery job and started dashing every day after school, and even on most weekends. On this night, I was working extra late because it was a holiday weekend. I was driving from 8 p.m. until 2 a.m., pretty much just going back and forth from the 24/7 McDonald's. A little past 2, I picked up another McDonald's order and went en route to the customer. It was said to be delivered at some sort of a warehouse, and in the notes, it said to go in through the side doors and drop it off at the front desk. When I got there, I pulled into this huge parking lot. It was mostly empty, only having a few semi-trucks in it. The building was definitely an old warehouse though, being just a large rectangle with a few windows and a single door at the front. I checked one more time to make sure I had it right to deliver it through the side door, then pulled around to the side and parked. The side door was one of those really heavy metal doors with a small glass window. I looked through that tiny window and didn't see anything but a small and dark entrance room, but the glare from my car's headlights made the window reflective and hard to see through. I swung it open and was immediately taken back. It was just as dark as it seemed through the window, and it only had a tiny wall light in the corner that was more of a dim safety light. There was no front desk, so I walked around the corner and stood at the end of a long, unlit corridor. I knew that most places that have night shift workers don't keep on the unnecessary lights, but this seemed excessive. I couldn't even see the end of the hallway, so if I were to walk down there, I would be walking into complete darkness. I took my phone out and checked, now for a third time, to see if I'd gone to the wrong place or through the wrong door. Everything seemed right, but there wasn't any way I was going to walk through that hallway. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized how quiet the whole building was. No machinery moving or people talking. Not a sound at all. I decided to call the customer. I clicked on their name and had it dial the number, and just a moment later, I heard a phone ring echo from the other end of the hallway. After another few seconds, it rang again, but it was closer and louder this time. I stared into this empty corridor and could barely make out the faint glow of someone's phone. "Hey, I got an order here from DoorDash. I'm gonna leave it right here for you," I said, setting the bag down in front of me. The figure of a large man started to come out of the dark corridor, but they didn't say anything. I waited another second, but as they got closer, it just really seemed unnerving the way they were walking so fast and not speaking. I had this feeling like someone was going to jump out behind me or something, and overall was a little freaked out. I turned around and walked quickly out of the door and back to my car. A few moments later, I saw some movement from behind the small glass window on the door just before I pulled away. That whole thing, it gave me chills and had me call it a night and go straight home. In the end, I chose to believe there was just a weird situation all around, but nothing really happened, so I blew it off. A couple days would go by, and on Monday evening, while I was driving again, I got a strange call. It was from the police department. What happened next was more complicated than it had to be, but basically they questioned me about why I was at that specific warehouse at 2:30 a.m. on Saturday morning. Apparently they had security footage of my car pulling up. After explaining I was just a DoorDash driver, and I proved it with the delivery receipt, they told me what was going on. They said that the workers came back from their holiday weekend, where the warehouse was not in operation, and found a DoorDash delivery sitting in the middle of the hallway. Whoever was there had broken in and ordered with a fake account, which is all scary in its own right, but the creepiest part is that they didn't even take the bag of food. It's pretty obvious that they were looking for something else. I don't know what they wanted from me, but I can only assume that if I had stayed and waited for the man, something terrible would have happened. I'm a truck driver for a moving company on the East Coast. We specialize in cross-country moving, typically moving people to the far West Coast, which can take anywhere from 20 to 40 hours, depending on the locations. I only did the driving for the company, not any of the boxing or loading, so the actual job was 100% just driving and picking up or dropping off the trailer at the houses. I'd been working with this company for almost 4 years at the time. This job was like every other. I got to the pickup address and loaded up the trailer full of the customer's belongings. This was a 30-hour drive in total, which I would do with 2 to 3 short rest stops. The hardest states to drive through are in the Midwest, specifically Iowa and Nebraska. There's absolutely nothing there. It's just dead roads with endless fields of grass beside them. It makes for a very boring and therefore tiring drive. As I passed through the Iowa border into Nebraska, the sun had just set and I'd been on the road for about 20 hours. I took a short break already a couple states back, but was just about ready for another. My eyes were heavy and I could feel the drowsiness coming in, but a few more miles down, I saw something on the side of the road. A car was stopped off to the side of my lane with its headlights on. It was a narrow road, so I slowed down to carefully pass. As I did, I noticed the exhaust was steaming, so the car was still running. There was also a man leaning against the driver door and looking right at me. I passed by and gave him a nod, but as I got further down the road, I saw him get back into the car. It was very strange for someone to be sitting on the side of an empty road with a car that still runs. He didn't look like he was in any sort of trouble. He looked like he was waiting. I checked my mirrors often, but the car's headlights disappeared behind me after a few minutes. I was a bit more awake now, but my eyes still felt heavy. Only a mile or so more down the road, I saw another car. This one was sideways in the middle of the road, and as I got closer, I saw another vehicle on the side. It was a large box fan. I wasn't sure exactly of the situation, but seeing that gave me a bad feeling. I eased into my brakes, but the car stayed in the middle of the road, so I was forced to come to a full stop. I was maybe 20 yards away and could see multiple men standing along the road and one man in front of the car. I'd have to be the dumbest person in the world to not understand what this was at this point. With no better options, I started moving the truck backward. The men stayed where they were with this horrifying confidence. Then a light shined behind me and a car approached, blocking the way back. A man got out of the car, sprinting at the back of my trailer, and at the same time, all of the men in the front started sprinting at me too. In that instant, my mind went blank and all of my adrenaline took over. I slammed on the gas as I heard a pop on the back of the trailer and the doors swung open. The men in front yelled and tried to stand in my way, but once they saw I wasn't stopping, they jumped on the side of the road. I rammed right into the car, knocking it off the road and completely destroying it. A few gunshots sounded in the distance, but none hit. I could hear cargo falling out of the trailer for the next 5 miles before I was able to call the police and meet an officer on the road. Of course, this was a total mess, but as it all unfolded, it turned out to be much more than just a random attack and robbery. When police arrived at the scene, the car I'd slammed into was left behind, being damaged beyond drivable. With it, they tracked down one of the members of the attackers who gave up information on the others. They had information on the rich homeowners that were moving, then planned to stop me and steal all of the belongings with their box van. They never said what exactly they would have done to me after they robbed the truck, but I don't think it's a stretch to assume that it would have been a lot easier for them to not leave any loose ends. I used to work for my best friend's parents' restaurant. I did deliveries for them and would sometimes help clean tables or whatever too. The job in itself was fine, but it felt very uncomfortable to have my friend's parents as my boss. I thought it wouldn't be too bad after a while, but it just never got better. They hated every time something wouldn't go exactly as planned, and they also scheduled me and my friend on opposite days, so it didn't even feel like we worked together, which was the whole point of me taking the job. This happened during my 3rd and final month working there. It was a regular night to start, getting a few quick deliveries, but it really slowed down toward the back half of the night. My friend's dad hated it when it was slow, because I'd be standing around waiting for orders, and he'd always be grumpy about it, even though it wasn't my fault. Around 8:30, which was an hour since my last delivery, and 30 minutes until the end of my shift, he picked up a phone call, and I overheard him say that we could deliver. Afterwards, he made the food and handed me the bag to deliver, but when I searched the address up, it was 40 minutes away. Of course I complained, because by then my shift was over in 15 minutes, and this delivery would take nearly an hour and a half, but he didn't care. I could tell he was just upset about me waiting around, which again was not my fault, but after a brief argument, I did as he said. 40 minutes was pretty far away for our small town, so I had no idea where this address was. By the time I was 2 minutes away, it was just before 10 p.m. There were no houses nearby from what I could see until the last minute of the drive when it had me turn down a small street that led to a row of maybe 6 houses. They all look old and outdated, and they were the only houses I'd seen in the last 5 minutes of driving. I slowly passed by each house and looked at their numbers until I found the right one. Then I parked on the street right next to the driveway. I'm not gonna lie, this place gave me some spooky vibes. It was so far from everything, and the houses themselves were just old and creepy. I got out and brought the bag up to the doorstep, then rang the doorbell. Nobody came to the door, so I tried knocking. It was late and I wanted to get this over with, so I was getting impatient. As I waited, I looked around. The street had no cars on it or in any of the driveways, and none of the actual lights were on inside any of the houses. I carried the bag back to my car and called the customer's cell. They didn't pick up, so I just sat in my car and tried to think of what to do next. They hadn't paid for the food yet, so I couldn't just leave it on their doorstep. Then I saw a light move around inside the house. I got out and saw the light move through the downstairs windows and over to the front door. Then it turned off. A second later, the door opened. There was a young man, early 20s, standing in the doorway holding a large flashlight in one hand and a grocery bag in the other. I walked up and asked if he had ordered the food. He nodded and apologized for taking so long to answer the door. I said it was all right and tried to hand him the bag, but he just held up both of his hands to show me they were full, then asked if I'd kindly put the food on the kitchen table for him. I wasn't sure if he was joking or not at first, because he easily could have just put the flashlight or grocery bag down for a second, but then I realized he was serious. I peeked around him, and from the short entryway, I could tell that there was something off about this place. It was dusty all over, and it looked empty. Once I saw that and thought about the flashlight being used instead of the regular house lights, I was almost sure that this place was a vacant house. The man was still looking at me and waiting for a response. "Sorry, I'm actually in a rush. If you could just pay really quick, then I'll leave the bag right here on your porch." He didn't like that answer, and he showed it with his face. He set down the grocery bag, then took one step out of the doorway and onto the porch. I backed up so as to not be too close to him. There was something in his eyes that told me he was about to do something, and I wasn't going to wait for whatever that was to happen. I dropped the bag and sprinted for my car, driving away as the men watched me intently from the porch. I was shaking for most of the drive back, unsure of what could have just happened. Of course, though, when I told my friend's dad about what happened, all he seemed to care about was that I didn't make the man pay. For that reason, I just quit right there on the spot. I knew my friend would be upset, but I'd had enough of his parents being dicks to me for doing nothing wrong. After that, I was pretty heated and was thinking more about that than I was about the man who lured me to a vacant house and likely tried to rob me, or even worse. Being so distracted, I never called the police, not until it was too late anyway. Thankfully, I wasn't dumb enough to go inside the house though, because if I had, I probably never would have returned from that delivery. This happened a couple years ago. I'm a young female, and I'd just turned 16, and I'd gotten my driver's license. I didn't have my own car, but I was able to borrow my parents' car whenever they didn't need it. Gas was pretty cheap at the time, and driving was so new to me that I really enjoyed it. On weekends, I used to love driving through somewhere and getting food late at night, then just driving all around town while listening to music. I think it felt so nice because I'd actually get to be alone, which is not very common when living with your parents. One weekend, I think on a Saturday, I took my parents' car out. I drove through a 24-hour McDonald's to get a drink and a snack, then started driving around. I never had a planned route, I just drove wherever I felt like, but for the most part, I tried to avoid anywhere that would have a lot of other cars around. There were a lot of back roads in my town that went between neighborhoods, but nobody ever really used them because the main roads were quicker. I turned down one of these roads that led to a really nice neighborhood with expensive houses. But not very long down the road, headlights flashed in my mirrors, and I saw a car coming up behind me. They were flashing their lights on and off. There were no other cars, so they had to be signaling to me, but I didn't know why. This went on for a whole minute, until they started speeding up and getting closer to the back of my car. I was still relatively new to driving, and didn't know how to deal with this or what to do, so I just kept driving. I was hoping to reach the neighborhood and maybe pull over in a less discreet area, but my plans were cut short. The car behind me backed off slightly. Then I heard their engine revving, and they sped up, ramming into the back of my car. My car jerked forward, and I was stunned for a second, but it didn't seem to do any serious damage. There was a lot going through my mind at that point. I was scared and nervous about pulling over, but I also didn't want to bring my parents' car home damaged without even getting the other driver's insurance information. I pulled the car to the side and put it in park. The car behind me pulled off as well, parking their car really close to my bumper. They flashed their lights again. I didn't know whether to stay in my car or get out. I was just in such an uncomfortable position with no idea how to handle this. After a few seconds, I opened my door and stepped out. Their windows were hard to see through, so I couldn't see who was inside. I walked to the back of my car and tried to see what the damage looked like, but they had parked so close that it was hard to get a good view. Then I heard their door open. I looked and saw a man getting out and looking at me. He was smiling with a friendly face and did a polite wave as he walked toward me. I was expecting an angry man to start yelling at me or say that I cut him off earlier or something, but this was an odd surprise. "Sorry about your car. I mustn't have been paying attention," he said, still in a friendly manner. "It's alright. Can I just get your insurance info?" He looked away, then looked back at me. "Sure, it's right in my car." He pointed at the passenger door, like he wanted me to go over there. He just stayed where he was, looking at me like I was supposed to go. After a long, awkward pause, I told him I was just going to go home because the damage didn't seem so bad. I didn't know what this man was on, but something didn't feel right. "Oh, you can't drive that home, or you will damage him more. Come with me, I'll help you arrive." He took a few steps closer to me. His smiling face and friendly remarks were really creepy. My car definitely wasn't too damaged to drive either, and offering me a ride was just inappropriate in this circumstance. I said no and started walking quickly to my car. but the man grabbed my arm firmly and stopped me in my trance.
Come on, the crash must have gotten you confused,
he said, starting to pull me back.
Okay, I'll go with you,
I said, getting him to let go of me. I followed him to his car and slowly walked to the passenger side while he entered the driver's seat. Right when he shut his door, I sprinted back to my car. I heard him get out, but I slammed my door and locked it before he could reach me. He pressed his body up against the window and stared at me for a second, then ran back to his car. I drove away, and in the mirrors, I saw him make a 3-point turn and exit in the opposite direction. When I got home, I woke my dad up and told him what happened. He told me that I never should have stopped. He called the police, but the man was never identified. I'll never know what that man was trying to do or where he was going to take me. I just fear that someone else might not have been as lucky as I was. It was between 2 and 3 a.m. and I was doing a delivery. I worked at a 24-hour Italian restaurant, so we delivered pastas, soups, and pizzas frequently. We didn't have designated delivery drivers, but we'd just figure it out once the order comes in. This was a small, single-meal order that was just 15 minutes from the restaurant. I assume 15 minutes is on the longer side of deliveries for most other places, but our owner was greedy and had us accept orders from up to 30 minutes away. I was listening to music and relaxing, going down a long straight road, when I saw a figure. They were right in the middle of my lane. I slowed down, and as I got closer, they started waving their arms in the air, running toward my car. I was in a 1-lane road, and there were cars in the oncoming traffic lane, so I had to stop and wait for them to pass before I could go around. The guy ran up to my car and started banging on my window. He started yelling, saying he was out of gas and just needed some help. He was so aggressive with the way he was asking for help, though, it was just weird. As soon as the other cars passed, I turned a bit to the right so as to not run over the guy's feet, then sped off. The guy looked like he was trying to chase my car down the road, so I thought he might have been drunk. But 20 seconds down the road, there was a blue pickup truck on the side. I thought maybe the guy wasn't lying, but the way he went about asking for help was crazy. After a couple minutes, I'd stopped thinking about it and relaxed for the rest of the drive. I pulled into the customer's driveway and brought them food up to their door. After they finished paying with cash, I thanked them and started back to my car. As I walked down the driveway, I saw a car parked down the street with its lights on. My stomach dropped. It was that same blue pickup truck I'd seen earlier. It wasn't there when I came down the street before, so it had just gotten there. I got back in my car and looked at my rearview mirror for a minute, then started backing out because I couldn't stay in the customer's driveway for too long without it being weird. I started driving down the street toward the truck. As I passed them, I could see that same crazy guy staring at me in the driver's seat. I stepped on the pedal harder to get out of there quicker, but in my rearview mirror, I saw the truck make a U-turn, start heading down the road toward me. The whole way back to the restaurant was a long straight road with few cars or places to stop. A minute down this road, I saw that truck appear behind me. This guy was insane. I remember thinking about how crazy he was when he stopped me in the middle of the road. What was he trying to do? It was a terrifying thought. I reached for my phone in my pocket and carefully dialed 911 as the truck was gaining on me quickly. I told the operator that I was being followed by some crazy guy in a blue pickup truck and gave them the road I was on and the direction I was going. They said a patrol officer was just 2 minutes down the road from me and told me to remain calm and continue driving until I see them. I did as they said, but only a few seconds later, the truck sped up and went into the oncoming traffic lane to pass me. I slammed on my brakes just as they swerved in front of me to cut me off. I stopped just a couple inches from hitting the side of the truck. My heart was pounding and I was in a state of shock. Then I heard their car door open and footsteps running around the truck and over to my car. I was shaking, trying to put it in reverse, but the man ran up and started banging on my window again, yelling and screaming. I backed away, and after a moment, the man ran back to his truck. That's when I saw flashing red and blue lights from ahead. The truck swerved back around and past me as the patrol car chased him down the road. I was later informed that the man was eventually caught. What makes this even more terrifying is that along with both drugs and alcohol, they found rope and handcuffs in the back seat of his car. I was seeing my family over the holidays and went on a short road trip to and from my parents' house. I stayed for just over a week, then I left to go back home on a Tuesday afternoon around 3 o'clock. The first hour was full of driving through the city, then another hour of going through the suburbs before it was just a long, narrow highway. By 10 p.m., the road was completely empty. I was also getting tired, and my eyes were getting heavy. I turned off my music because that was just making me more sleepy. As I was trying to focus on staying awake, I saw a small light glimmer in the road ahead. It was the reflection of my headlights shining on a car that was parked on the side of the road. I slowed down to pass it. It looked abandoned, but it was dark and their windows were tinted. Getting stuck all the way out here would be awful, since the nearest town was an hour back. I kept my eyes open in case someone was walking on the side. And a couple minutes down the road, I saw another light. It was in the mirror, but it was blindingly bright. So much so that I couldn't even see the car at all, just their lights. They had to be somewhat close, so I started slowing down a little so they could pass me. But then I saw something up ahead. A car parked right in the middle of the road, blocking the entire road. The lights were off too, so I didn't see it until I was close. I stopped as soon as I saw it, but the light in the mirrors got brighter. I could hear them coming up behind me. I started to turn my car around, but then I saw the car behind me had parked diagonally across the road, blocking my way back. It all came together to me at that instant. I heard multiple doors open and close. When I looked around, I saw at least 3 people running at me. I was in a full panic. I drove off the road and into the trees, trying to maneuver around them and get back onto the other side of the road around the cars. I was focusing so hard on not hitting a tree or getting stuck, I wasn't even checking if they were chasing me. As I was making my way around though, maybe 10 seconds after I'd driven off the road, a gunshot went off, hitting somewhere in front of my car. I was shaking and panicking, and accidentally grazed the side of a tree as I was making my way back up to the road. Another shot went off, this time hitting the back of my car as I got back on the road and drove away. Once I was a good distance away from the scene, I tried to call the police, but my phone was completely out of service. I was going well over the speed limit, knowing there was no safety nearby. After 10 minutes of driving, I was able to get enough reception to call the police. Thankfully, the attackers didn't seem to chase me past the scene though. They never located them as far as I know. I hope they were only planning on robbing people, but the way they were set up in the middle of nowhere and were willing to use their guns makes me think they were planning on something much worse.